Learning about security doesn't need to be scary.
If you want to ship code securely with confidence, check out the URL below and challenge yourself with thousands of challenges in 29 coding frameworks. Let the games begin.
So the next talk is keeping up with open source security and automated developer focus approach. We've got Edwin Kwan from Tyro, so please welcome Edwin.
Hi everyone, so my name is Edwin Kwan and I look after application security at Tyro Payments. So I'm really excited to be here today to give a talk to you guys and thank you for taking the time out to come to this talk among all the other options out there. Just before I start, just to get a show of who I'm speaking to. Who are developers around here? Any developers? Okay, anyone in security? So I'm not sure what other groups would come to AppSec today. So developers, securities, any other groups that I missed out? Ops, operations? Yep, sorry. All right, so we've got a diverse group down here. So when we build an application today, we're most likely going to be using open source components. And that's a really great thing because it allows us to speed up our development. And it does that by providing us functionality that we would otherwise have to write ourselves. There's so many components to choose from out there. It is really hard to pick. And if you pick the wrong component, or you pick the wrong version of the component that you want, you could be introducing a security vulnerability into your application. So today, I'd like to talk a little bit about that. I'd like to give you guys, or try and convince you guys of three things. The first thing is that this is very important. And I want to talk to you about an approach that you should take to address this, which is it should be an automated approach, and it should be a developer-focused approach. I need to click it, don't I? Yeah. So, before I begin, I'm also going to talk about why open source security matters. Why this is one of the things that you should be doing. And then I'll talk about why you should be using a developer-focused approach to do this, or to deal with this. And then I'll talk about Tyro's approach, our journey in terms of dealing with this, and two main things in particular. So the first one is automated time-based waivers, and the second one is security self-serve. This is relatively new. We've been working on this for a while. We've actually made some changes just last week, and I'll talk to you guys about that. And then I'll talk about what we hope to do going forward. How do we want to get better at doing this? So, open source security matters. So I'm hoping to be able to convince you guys all down here today that if you don't already have the sec in your DevSecOps program, that this is one of the first things that you would want to do. So the next few slides, I'm going to use some stats from this particular report down here. So this is the 2019 State of the Software Supply Chain. And it was released, I think about 5 months ago at the end of June. So it's relatively current. The first thing this report says that open source is everywhere. We're all using it. It said that in 2018, there was the number of Java components that was downloaded, 146 billion. This was measured from Maven Central. This is the number of components that we downloaded, just Java itself, from Maven Central. So we're using a lot of these components, and it has increased compared to the previous year. So 68% increase. We're using a lot more of it now than we were previously. The report also said that when we deliver our applications, 85% of those applications are actually comprises of open source components. So we only write 15% of all the code that we're going to ship out there. And when I saw this, it kind of shocked me a little bit. So at Tyro, we have some processes in terms of security and education that we have for all our development teams. So everyone who joins Tyro as a software engineer, we put them through a security training program. So they do this 2-day program where they learn about how to think like a hacker. Is my code secure? How do I exploit it? They learn about the OWASP top 10 to try and make sure everything is secure. And we have processes within our SDLC to make sure we review our code, to make sure that everything is secure. And these stats tell me that we're doing all this thing, which is really good, but it's only for the 15% of the code that we're shipping. And it made me wonder, what about the other 85%? those other 85% of the components, do the developers who are creating them, do they know about security? Are they aware about the vulnerabilities and how to write code securely? Do they have a process for, a review process to make sure that the code is, good quality and secure? And do they have a commitment in terms of how quickly do they address any vulnerabilities that is discovered? So it's quite shocking there. The stats also, it's not in the slide, but also say that if it's a web app, you only write 3% of the code. So it's even smaller amount that you write if it's a web application. So that was pretty shocking out there. The next stats that it came is that not all the open source components are created equal. Of all the Java components that were downloaded in 2018, 10.3 of them had a known vulnerability. So we know that there is a known vulnerability and we're still downloading it. To put that in perspective, this was the number of vulnerable open source components that was downloaded from Maven Central in 2018. So I know the big thing about that has been around for a while is the Equifax breach, right? It was about Struct being vulnerable, and there was a report somewhere along the way saying that, even after all these years since the breach, we are still downloading those vulnerable components of Struct. So open source security is very important. It's even worse for JavaScript. So if you're all into Node.js, 50% of all the components that were downloaded last year had known vulnerabilities. And they did analysis of it. So 1 in 3 of those vulnerabilities had a high in terms of the CVE rating, and 1 in 10 had a critical rating in there. So we're using a lot more open source components, and we're downloading a lot more vulnerabilities into our system. And as a result of that, we're seeing more breaches happening that are being attributed to open source vulnerabilities in there. So this was a survey that was done, and the respondents said that there has been an increase in 70% of all vulnerabilities or all breaches that were associated with an open source vulnerability. And what does that mean? So, 5 years ago, 1 in 4 of them was attributed to an open source vulnerability. Today, 5 years ago, it was 1 in 7. Today is 1 in 4. So we're seeing more breaches from open source. So I hope I convince you guys that this is really important. It's also, we keep saying that, hey, it's all about using vulnerable versions, but it's also really hard to keep using the latest version. I didn't put it out here, but in their report, they also did a survey. So they did a study. They studied 14 open source components over 115 days to measure how many changes are made that are non-backwards compatible. And in the 115 days, there were 282 changes that were made that was non-backwards compatible. So open source components are great. They help us to move faster, but there is a tax involved in it. There's a maintenance cost that a lot of times we forget comes with the speed of using this software. So next, I want to talk about why you should be using an automated developer-focused approach in addressing this. So as part of the same survey, they say that 48%, about half of all developers, they believe that security is really important, but they do not have enough time to spend on it. They've got delivery deadlines, they've got other pressures around, and security is one of them. And they also say that some of the challenges that they are facing with security are they find out the process a little bit too late, just before they want to go live and deploy. They're discovering all these issues that's pushing the deadlines back. It slows down their development, or they don't really know what they need to do. Hence, that's why you should be using a developer-focused approach when dealing with open source security. So now I'm going to talk about Tyro's open source security journey. So what we did in terms of how we try to address this space. So before I start, I'd like to talk a little bit about Tyro. So who knows what Tyro is or what we do? It's been in the news this week, I guess. So Tyro is an Australian financial institution specializing in merchant credit and debit acquiring. You might notice this EFTPOS terminal, and that's a Tyro terminal. So we're based in Sydney, and we help small to medium enterprises to grow their business by providing them with innovative products and solutions. So the company has about over 400 staff, and we have over 20,000 customers. An interesting story about Tyro. So Tyro was founded by 3 network engineers. So these 3 network engineers had a company called Metaplex. It's a switching kind of company. I'm not sure exactly what it does, but it was bought by Cisco during the dot-com boom. And if you got acquired by Cisco during that time, you're pretty set for life. So this was in 2000. They quit their company that got bought, and then they came back to Sydney. They're in their late 30s, about to retire, as you do. And they were wondering what to do next. And at that time, the RBA released a report saying that the payment space is pretty dominated by a few major companies. And they put out a call for competition, saying that, hey, we're going to offer anybody that is interested a restricted ADI license, a temporary special license to operate in this space for anyone who wants to become an acquirer. And those 3 engineers went, well, it's like switching, isn't it? You're moving money around a little bit, so it's the same thing. So Tyro got founded by those 3 engineers, and it was actually called Money Switch when it first started. So it was about moving money around, you're switching money around. And we later changed our names to Tyro. And I think Tyro represents, it stands for being an underdog. So we're an underdog trying to take on the bigger players in there. So some interesting fun facts about Tyro. So because of that, we always pride ourselves at Tyro saying that we are a tech company with a banking license. We're not a bank that has to do tech. And such, I want to talk about our engineering department. So our engineering department has around 160 engineers, and the department consists of around 7 tribes. So each tribe is based around a business focus. So you could have one for like banking or one for payments. And there are around 20 delivery teams in there. And obviously each tribe has 2 to 4 delivery teams. And each delivery teams are cross-functional. And every tribe has a quality advocate and a solutions architect. The other thing about Tyro is that we use a microservices architecture for all applications. And we have over 200 applications running in production. And the last thing I want to share, which would be relevant in terms of how we want to try and get things out, is we practice continuous releases at Tyro. So what this means is that whenever you make a change and you commit and push this change to the master repository, it kicks off a CI pipeline. And in that pipeline, we make sure we build, we run all the tests. And if everything is good and successful at the end of the test, we mark that deliverable as a release candidate. Not everything goes, we have different deploy options, and I'll go through them. So the first one is a weekly deploy. So what it means is that every week on the same day, we will take the last known release candidate, and that's what goes into our production. The other deploy option that we have is what we call self-serve deploy, where the tech leads or whoever's deploying can go to this web page and push a button or click a button, and the same process happens, but is fully automated. So we've got different deploy options, and this makes dealing with open source security a little bit tricky. One of the challenges with this is it's really hard to roll back when you see a problem, because there's so many different versions in there. So we tend to roll forward and not back. So now I can talk about Tyro's open source security journey. So this journey started in 2015, and it is around the same time as when we decided to get our banking license. So around that time, April was looking at our special ADI license, and they look at this program that they put together, and they decide that this program was a failure because there was only 2 companies that took it on, and Tyro was one of them. So they came to Tyro and said, hey, we're not going to renew this ADI license that you have once it's expired. So if you want to keep operating, you got 2 options. You can either work with someone who has this license, or you could become a bank. And we decided, well, all right, we'll become a bank. And I guess there's a lot more things you have to do as a bank. You obviously have to, some of those things are you got to hold deposits and obviously give loans and everything. And because of that, our risk exposure is a lot greater. So before it's just our payment terminals that we own, talking to our systems and everything, but now we need to be able to give our customers a way to actually manage their account. It's a lot more attack surface, and hence we started our journey on this. So we decided to look at open source components, and like everyone who would have done this journey, the first thing that you do is you look for a particular tool that would work for you. So we found a tool that would do that, and we decided to scan everything that we have to see what is the state of our open source health. And this was what it was back in September 2015. So we didn't have 200 applications, we only had 63 applications, and we had 80 critical. So this is based on a CVSS score where critical is a 10. So we had 80 of them that are critical, 405 that are a high, 112 that are medium. We didn't do any lows because we were just too afraid to find out what that value would be. But if you look at it, 63 applications, 80 critical. So it kind of worked out to be 1 or more critical per application in there. So there's quite a lot of stuff in there. And at that time when we were looking at it, we say to ourselves, you know what, let's try and address maybe just a critical and a high, and that'll be really good. That'll be a really good achievement for what we're trying to do. So this was the approach that we took to deal with this. So the first thing that we did was we decided to break the build on security issues. I know some of you are cringing. Oh, you're breaking the build. But what this is different is we were breaking the build for any new security issues that you'll find. So everything that was listed in the previous one, it's safe. It's been grandfathered in. Everything else that hasn't been discovered prior when we drew the line in the sand would result in the build breaking. So we then decided to address the existing one, and we did it based on priority. So we said to the teams, forget about everything else. Let's just deal with the critical ones first. So I remember the way we did this was we created Jiras. It was all very manual. Jiras, we had like Post-it notes because everyone had a Kanban board, like put it up there. Please address this component on this application, and please do it by this date. And the way we did it was we gave teams quite a bit of time to address each one of them. And as we addressed them, we went to the next one. So we went critical, did that. We went down to high, and this was the results that we had in there. So it took a while. It took a very long time. The first jump that you saw from 2015 to 2016 were the very easy fixes. The one where I just bumped the version and it just works. It's like yes. The ones after that were the more painful ones. We haven't done anything on this for a few years, and it's now 2 major version jumps ahead, and it's not backwards compatible, and we got to change a lot of stuff, and it's going to take a lot of time. So we're pretty happy with the results, and we thought we're done. Yes, secure. But there were some challenges with that, and really discovered very quickly that addressing security is a very continuous process. That security issues were still popping up. We weren't introducing them in, but the components that we were using, we were discovering new vulnerabilities in them. And this didn't work very well for the process that we had at the time where we broke any new security issues. It was very disruptive, so teams would have their builds break overnight because a new CV was released, came in, broke your build. And for the developers, if you guys are doing TDD, you go from rate green, you start with failing tests, and then it passed, if it's still failing, it's something that you haven't fixed. But for this case, it's nothing that you did. It's failing for a whole different reason. So we had teams going, this is not good. I didn't break this. Why am I having to fix this? It was very disruptive, and teams hated it, and rightfully so. They're trying to meet the deadline, they're trying to get out there, and who releases CV at this worst possible time? So that's when we decided to use an automated time-based waiver approach. So I'll explain more about that and how it works. So the first thing that we did for that was we introduced a couple of SLOs, so service level objectives, for when teams should address security issues, which are CVEs in open source components. So we kind of had this thing in there where it says that, hey, if it's a critical, you should just drop tools and address it straight away. If it's a high, you should do it in 4 weeks. And the reason why we picked 4 weeks was we were working in 2 weekly iterations. So if it came in and you are mid-iteration, you've already planned what you're going to do, you're trying to work towards that, you can put that into your next sprint or your next iteration. So it's not disruptive. You can plan for it. And that's where that 4 weeks came from. The medium and low for the 3 and 6 months, they were just numbers that we just picked from the air, thinking that they were reasonable enough with that. So the automated waivers, the way it works is based on when we discover it. So it's not when it was released, not based on the CV release date. It was when our tool discovered the vulnerability for that application. So essentially is when we first discovered it, we will record the date that it was discovered, and we would keep letting the builds pass, and everything is good. And once that date is passed, we'll then break the build. And the way we did that was the tool that we had like a little flag for each CVE where you can set the status. So we kind of used that, and it was just specific to that particular tool that we're using. So we had a status where it was confirmed, it means it's going to break your build. Anything else, you're okay. So this is essentially how it worked. It was just a script that we had that pulled our SCA tool, our software composition analysis tool. Every day it just runs and it checks, are there any new CVEs that were discovered? If there is, record the date that it was discovered, and don't do anything. After the date has passed, switch the flag, we'll break. So that's kind of essentially what it is. This was actually something that we only just released to engineering. Was it last week or 2 weeks ago? So it was very recently. It was just something that we just did. So this works really well only if you have good notification to the engineering teams. You need to make sure that people are fully aware that there is a problem and when you need to fix it. So we have a few ways of doing that. The first one is via email. So the moment we first discover it, the email goes out to the team saying, hey, you've got this issue, please address it by this date. There's also a dashboard. So for all the engineering teams, where we're sitting, we've got 2 large TV monitors, or 1 or 2 or more, above our pods, and it kind of shows stats that we care about, like our health check and all. So one of the things that we put up there is a security dashboard, so the teams will know, hey, how many days do I have left before this becomes a problem? And the last thing that we have is a dashboard, and we use Confluence just to collate everything for the teams, so they can go in there and they can take a look and they know exactly which one to prioritize first based on the end dates, which is when the SLOs are due. So that was one of the approach that we did for that. Another thing that we did, that we realized is a lot of times teams are not able to address the problems because there is no fixed version. Nothing's available. What do I bump it up to? There is nothing available in there. So it obviously varies from security issues. Sometimes you have to address it, you have to mitigate it or remove it or replace it. But most of the time, you're just going to wait. You're just going to give them more time. So we've also introduced what we like to call actionable intelligence, where those waivers, automatic waivers, would not expire if there is no fixed version available. So we might have 3 months for medium, but after the 3 months, there is still nothing you can do. We're not going to break the build. We're going to keep going. So the teams are aware, but once it happens, it will then break your build. So then we'll talk about what you can do next. All right, so the next thing that we did was security self-serve. You got to empower the teams to be able to manage security and be able to deal with it in a way that works best for what they're doing. So what we did was we allowed teams to essentially apply for an extension whenever those SLOs have expired. And essentially what it does is it gives the teams more time to deal with those issues in there. We don't normally encourage teams to use that functionality, but there are other reasons why they need to do that. So it's business priorities, we've made a commitment to get a certain product out to market by a certain date, so we need to focus on that. Or we just need more time, we need to bump to the newest version of Spring. That's not something that you can do very quickly. That's going to take a lot more effort. So those are some of the reasons in there. And how do we do this? The first thing is you need the technical lead for your team to approve it. At Tyro, the technical leads, every team has a tech lead, and the tech leads are accountable for security for their application. So they need to be able to approve the extension of it. And once they've done that, you get 14 days of extension time in there. After 14 days, it gets reverted and it fails again, and you can then go apply for more time. And every time you do that, you have to put a supporting reason as to why you're doing it, and we regularly review it. So we've had this for a while in different forms, and I could say that no one has abused it so far. Everyone's been really good in terms of how they use the self-serve. We don't really monitor it that closely anymore because teams can be trusted to do the right thing. So how does that work? So it's initially you're trying to do a build either locally or on your pipeline. It's breaking due to a vulnerability. The tech lead will go in there, make the change. The build will then pass. And then after the 14 days, we'll go in there, we'll revert the change for you, and then it breaks. So that is the steps that we took that we actually just released. I think it was last week. I think last week was when we did that. And now I'd like to talk about where we like to take it from here. What do we want to do? I'd like to shift it further left, even more than what we are doing today. So what if we're always using the latest and greatest versions of all our components, or maybe the N-1 version if you're not comfortable with the latest version? That would mean that whenever there's a security issue, either you've already addressed it before they did the responsible disclosure, or it's not going to be a major version change to do that. We're trying to do this. We had varying levels of success. What we found some of the challenges are with this is the teams that really adopt this really well are the teams who are already, I guess the newer applications where all their dependencies are already up there and it's very easy to bump up. And the other thing is they have a lot of faith in their automated tests. If you don't have a lot of, if you don't trust your automated tests and you have a lot of versions that are really old, that's going to cause a lot of problems for you. But that's where we're trying to go next. We're trying to talk about dependency hygiene in there. You saw those values in there about the number of, I guess, vulnerable or known components with known vulnerabilities being downloaded. A lot of those things are not direct dependencies. They're actually transitive dependencies. They're not things that we're directly downloading. It's some other components depending on something. So if we have good dependency hygiene to begin with, we can address a lot of that. And with that, how am I going for time? I'm doing pretty well. So I hope that what I can share with you guys is that open source security matters. This is quite an important thing to do. It should be automated. I would even go to say that it must be automated. And it must be something where you can empower developers to take charge of. And with that, thank you.
Awesome. We have 10 minutes for questions if anyone has any questions. Oh, perfect. Of course, Ben.
Thanks for your talk. The transitive dependencies you mentioned, I've kind of been through that a bit, where we sink a whole lot of time into looking at a CVE, realise that it's a transitive dependency. We're not actually using the dependency at all, so the CVE doesn't necessarily affect the project. How do you go about, tracking that there is no impact from a particular CVE?
The short answer is really hard. So we've tried different things in there. So we had some cases where I think teams are coming to us saying that, there were some problems in, I think, Angular. Can't fix that, or it doesn't apply to us. It's only for this particular things, functions, we're not using it. We then wrote some unit tests to specifically check, are we using those particular functions or those particular bits that are deemed vulnerable? And if it is, it fails the test. So that way we have some sort of indication going forward that we're okay to use this. But the moment someone else starts using those vulnerable functions and all, it would then break. But I've seen teams try to bump the versions and all explicitly. I don't know how well those are. And it all comes back to that whole 75% of code. Like, what are the practices that the maintainers for those components use? It's about picking the right tools too for that. So I guess the answer is it's not easy. Yeah.
Any other questions? Oh, yeah, a couple. Might start here, then come back over there.
You said there is not that much use of the automated self-serve extension system. Are you saying there's no use of the extensions, or just very not much use of extensions?
So it's good. Thanks for that. I'll clarify. So there is not a lot of people using extensions. So it's kind of saying that no one's really being abusing it. So the people who are requesting for the extensions have legitimate reasons for using it. So yeah, that's basically it. We're not abusing it. It's there. We teams do use it, and there is a need for it, especially when you have those really big version bumps. But they haven't been just blindly extending it as just a thing to do. Hey, every 2 weeks just extend. We haven't had any of that. So it just hasn't been abused. Yeah.
Hi. Thanks for that. So you mentioned that you extend the time for when a dependency has a vulnerability. If it does not have a upgrade, as in it's already on the latest version, does it get to a point where, it's considered critical, but there's no version upgrade? Would you tell the team to find an alternative for that dependency? So is it kind of like a risk-based approach?
Yeah, so it is definitely a risk-based approach. So we're in the process right now of trying to classify all our applications. And it depends on the CV and it depends on the application itself. So I guess it's wrong to say that every single dependency that doesn't have a version that you can bump into, we're going to just extend forever. And if that open source maintainer doesn't do anything, you can just keep using it. It's not always the case. So I say it's only in certain cases. We will also review it and go, hey, what is the actual risk that's involved in there? What's the exposure for that? What's this application actually doing? What information does it have? And if that's the case, then we go with the approach of we either mitigate it or we kind of look for a replacement and go, well, obviously this is the wrong thing to do. It's been a while. Is there something else that we can bring in to replace it?
Cool. Thanks.
Any other question? Oh, front.
Thanks for the talk. You mentioned that you're writing the tests for vulnerable functions and they fail if someone uses the function. Are you reviewing all the CVEs and the upgrades of the library and cleaning up these tests, or they stay in the system?
So are you asking back to the question over there about these functions, right? So are we reviewing it? Actually, we've only done that twice, and we wrote the test for them to put on there. And in terms of reviewing it, we haven't really gone through it as much. But I think since then, we've bumped to the newer version of Angular. So it's a case-to-case thing. We don't have a fixed process in terms of this is how we do it, this is what you should do. So exactly what you say. Sometimes we might go with the approach and go, we should write something in there, or we might wait, or no, this is really critical. We should do something about it. Let's mitigate it on a different area. Let's remove it altogether. Yeah.
Hey, thanks for the talk. How do you manage the security of the code that your developers are actually writing?
Manage the security as in, what do you mean by that?
So we've covered like all the dependencies and everything, right? But the 15% of the code that we're actually writing, is there something that you do about that?
Yeah, so we do have some things in that. It wasn't part of this talk because it was about open source. So what we come down to, a lot of it is awareness. It comes down to a lot in awareness, a lot in education, training. We do a lot of developer training. We do a yearly thing where we essentially do sort of like a CTF based on last year's pen test findings to just learn from it. We try and identify Tyro's top 10. We have static analysis tools, but we don't enforce them because there's a lot of false positives in them at the moment. So we have different ways to do in there. We also have, based on the business importance of the functionality you're building, we even have people from the security team review the code from that particular perspective as part of the process. Yeah, and obviously we do pen testing too. So lots of other things that cover that area for that 15%.
Yeah, thank you.
Anyone else? Going once? Going up.
Thanks for the talk, Edwin. As part of your SCA process, how do you manage or deal with nested dependencies in third-party libraries?
So those transitive dependencies.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, so same problem too. So we would flag it and the same thing. I know some teams, so you either wait for the developers to up to a newer version. Some teams have taken the approach of explicitly calling the newer version themselves and excluding it. Like I know you can do that in the POM, and they feel comfortable doing that, so they have gone with that approach. But we treat that exactly like how we treat anything else. It could be a third-party dependency, or if it's a third-party, a 21st-party dependency in there. It's no difference from our perspective.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Anyone else? Oh, yes, sweet.
What is the best way to increase awareness and hype in regards to breaking the build for devs to prevent those vulnerabilities from happening?
So raising awareness for breaking the builds, to break the builds. I had a conversation with someone in this group earlier before, and I think we talked about you should only be breaking the build when the company is at a certain maturity level for security before you can do that. So if you shouldn't be doing it too early. If you do it too early, it's going to be very disruptive. Everyone's going to hate you. And you don't want that. So you want to get a level where they can, there's definitely value. Everyone understands it, and it's the cost of doing it is low, which is why they automated stuff in there. So back to your question as to education and everything, you obviously sell the value of that. We've done that. We do a yearly awareness event for everybody. So we do like CTFs, but based on previous pen test findings on Tyro applications, so people understand the importance of it. But it all comes down to, I think, where the company is in terms of maturity. If we try to do that back in 2015 with all those things in there, well, we did, right? But we didn't do it for all the stuff that was grandfathered. It would be disastrous, because you don't want to. You're a security team, but you're part of the business, and the business has to go of what they want to do. So you're there to enable them and not to slow them down. Yeah.
Thanks.
Hi, thanks for the talk. I would like to ask what the ratio of the security staff per developers in your company?
Oh.
Thank you.
Yeah, I actually did the stats on that before. So it hasn't grown since 2015. Like in terms of the ratio. So right now there's 5 to 160, isn't it? Is what we have at the moment. Yeah. Which is better than most, because most is 1 to 100, isn't it? So, but we're doing pretty well.
I mean, 5 developers and 5 security guys and 150 developers.
5 security with 160 developers, yeah. But we also have, with each team, we have security champions. So people who are the most security aware. So we've tried to have a lot of events or a lot of upskilling, more training and more upskilling for them so that when they are doing their planning sessions, they're the ones wearing the security hat, asking those questions, thinking about it. It's almost like having your QA or your tester in the team thinking about those things where developers are focused on building it right. And you're going, what about this? What about that? So really it is a bit bigger than 5, but 5 full-time in a team.
One last question. Anyone? Last question.
Thanks again. Do you use the CVE score as the sole indicator of your risk around your components that you need to mitigate? Or do you have to look at the context of the systems?
So at the moment, I know where you're going with this. At the moment, yes, that is all that we use. I've had a few people come up to me before and go, CVE, depending on what the application is and where it is, it should have different weighting. But no, at the moment we just go, well, if it's critical, it's just critical. I told you that we're now doing that classification. That might change, but we're looking pretty good now in terms of we're just treating everything the same. The only reason why people might be a bit apprehensive on that is if there's a lot of stuff to deal with.
All right, thank you, Edwin. There's lunchtime, so thank you.
Thank you very much, guys.